Welcome back to the Real Jonathan Smith Show. Joining me now on the phone, Zach Hicks of Locked On Colts. Zach, first and foremost, go Pacers. Big win last night. Did you watch?
Oh yeah, I watched it. I've been following the Pacers ever since they traded for Tyrese Halliburton. Like that's when I was like, okay, cool. Like I'm gonna really get into this team now, especially with me covering the Indiana market. So I really wanted to get into the Pacers, and once I got Halliburton, everything kind of turned around for them. So I've been following them pretty close. And man, that was a fun game last night. They were shooting lights out last night.
Dude, it was so nice. I was so tensed up during the pregame, and then the game started and I relaxed once they started to make literally everything at one point. So great win for them last night, but you're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the Colts. What is your opinion on this Colts schedule? Is it a hard schedule? Is it an easy schedule? What are kind of your thoughts on the schedule as a whole?
Yeah, I think when you look at the NFL schedule, it's drastically different than a lot of other sports, especially like college football, for instance, where you can schedule those cupcakes early, those FCS games, those lower tier teams, and then you can really get into the meat of your schedule. Where the NFL, even if you're playing the worst NFL team, you're still playing a pretty solid team. I mean, you don't really know who the two or three pushovers are going to be until the year starts, but for the most part, most teams are going to be pretty competitive. So overall, I think it's a competitive schedule. There's some advantages, there's some disadvantages for the Colts in there. I know they have multiple teams that they're facing this year that are coming off of bye weeks, heading into their game against the Colts. So that's obviously a disadvantage. But the Colts, I believe I saw that they have to travel like the third least amount of air miles this year. When it comes to traveling to other stadiums. So there's pluses and minuses to it. I think they have very favorable end of the season stretch, at least what it looks like on paper. So that's nice to see. But, for the most part, I think, this is a very winnable schedule. If the Colts come out and they take care of business, they definitely have everything in place to make the playoffs this year.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think. I don't think that the schedule's too difficult. There aren't a ton of great quarterbacks on the schedule. Like Josh Allen in week 10, that might be it, so I thought that in terms of the quarterbacks that they're going to face, it's very advantageous for the Colts. What is the easiest 4-game stretch for the Colts this season? What's the 4-game stretch where we're all going to be sitting at home like, man, this Colts team looks really good right now, and they may not be really good. They're just playing some lesser opponents.
Yeah, it's funny because again, it's hard to really point that out before the season because you really can tell during the season, like, okay, cool, like this stretch right here, because this starting quarterback's out, this team's falling apart, like this stretch is going to be nice. And we saw that last year at the middle of the season when they faced, I want to say it was Carolina and New England in those couple week stretch last season. Like they were able to kind of, coast through those and go on this big winning streak. This year, I would say on paper, going into that final stretch of the year, that final 4 games after the bye week, I believe off the top of my head, I want to say it's Denver, there's the Giants in there, there's the Jaguars in there, and I think the Titans are in there.
Yeah.
So that's 4 teams. You finish your season 4 games against teams that didn't make the playoffs the year before. I know the Jaguars are better than what they finished with last year. I know the Titans can be a little bit more competitive this year, but that's the best scenario they could really ask for. Like you have a real good chance in that final month of the season to finish strong and win 4 straight games. Because even if all those teams overperform this year, you're not playing against Josh Allen. You're not playing against CJ Stroud in those final 4 games. You're playing against Daniel Jones, which maybe could be Drew Lock. You're facing Bo Nix, Will Levis, and Trevor Lawrence, who's the best of that bunch. But again, that's a pretty favorable stretch to end your season. So that was really what stood out to me when the schedule released. You see that bye week that's really late in the year, and then the 4 games following it, though, those are winnable games. And if you're a playoff team, you got to at least go 3-1 during that stretch to make the playoffs.
Yeah, once again, joined by Zach Hicks of Locked On Colts. That's the stretch that I had. I had it starting in week 13, though, when they play the Pats, because the Patriots aren't going to be very good this year. You don't have to worry about Belichick doing his voodoo on young quarterbacks to Anthony Richardson, and, it's Drake May. So that end of the year stretch is really, really nice. Let's flip it. What do you think is the toughest 4-game stretch of the year for the Colts?
It's really that middle of the year stretch. I think we're gonna really determine what kind of team this is. You could really pick out 4 games anywhere in there. I know the Vikings are just slapped in the middle there, so it kind of throws it off a bit. But I believe again, on top of my head, they have like the Dolphins in there. They have the Texans again in there. They got the Bills, the Lions in there. Like it's a tough middle of the season stretch for them. And that Vikings game is not going to be a pushover with Brian Flores as their defensive coordinator.
Oh
So
no.
I think that middle of the season stretch when they're playing against the top quarterbacks and the top offenses that they're going to face all year, it could be a track meet in a lot of those games. So for me, when I really look at this Colts schedule, like they got to start strong and they got to finish strong and then just survive that middle stretch. Like it doesn't need to be, you don't have to go 5-1 down the middle of the season. I mean, it would be awesome if you did, but if you can just survive that, hit around 500 on those games against top tier teams and really control the beginning and the end of your schedule this year, you're a playoff team. That's kind of the route to take for the Colts this upcoming season. But yeah, we're gonna see a lot about this team in that middle of the season stretch. I think the Jets are in there on Sunday Night Football too. That's going to be a
Yeah.
tough game. There's a lot of games there in that middle of the season where you're playing top defenses, top offenses, like historically great quarterbacks. Like, I mean, if Aaron Rodgers plays this year,
Yeah.
considering what he could be. I mean, Josh Allen in there, Jared Goff in that Lions team, Tua and that Dolphins team, CJ Stroud again. Like, that's a tough stretch there in the middle of the season.
It really is. I thought weeks 5 through 8 at Jacksonville, at Tennessee, and then they get Miami at home, and then they're at Houston. Like having 3 road divisional games over a 4 week stretch is just rough. And then the 1 week you come home, you're playing the Dolphins, who like, I don't know, that game's interesting to me. Like, I think that there's a world where the Colts kind of push Miami around and they win that game just because they're more physical. But on the other side of the coin, it's like the Dolphins could also just throw the ball all over the field against this young Colts secondary. And that wasn't super great last year. So that's going to be a really interesting stretch. So, Zach, I don't know if you do this or not, but I think it's very common practice for people to sit down with the schedule and go game by game, but like win, loss, win, whatever. What do you think is what do you think the Colts record is going to be? And also what's like the baseline of they should win at least this many games and this is like the ceiling of they won't win more than this many games.
Yeah, again, it's tough with the NFL because things change so much from year to year, especially with defenses. Like the top defense from the year before can be a bottom tier defense the next year just because of the way that defenses are. But I think when I was looking at the schedule, I mean, I could easily come up with, and I know everyone does this with their teams, but like 10, 11 wins feels like the goal for this team this year. Like, obviously, you want to aim higher than that. You want to aim for the number one seed in the conference and, 14 wins or whatever it is. But realistically, I think, 10 to 11 sounds good to me when I'm looking at this team and health permitted. Obviously, everyone's staying healthy. I think they can realistically get maybe a little bit more than that, maybe like 12, 13 if things go perfect for this team. But things rarely do go perfect for any
Yeah.
team, so it's hard to perfectly say that right now. But yeah, no, I think 10, 11 wins is a good projection for this team. They have their quarterback, they added weapons. The defense should be much better with Latu coming in. They've made some good adjustments. It's just, can these guys stay healthy? That's really the biggest thing because last year we didn't see that with this team. But yeah, I think when I look at this schedule, I can easily pick out 10, 11 wins, even when you factor in the crazy losses that happen. Like they're not going to win at Jacksonville because they just never do.
Yeah.
So we know we know that's not happening. But besides that, they have 16 winnable games on there outside of that one.
That's fair enough. Joined by Zach Hicks of Locked On Colts. That's about where I had him. For like the baseline is they should win at least 7 games. If
Yeah.
things went as terrible as they could, I think that the baseline 7. I think the max is around 12, so I like them to win 10 or 11 games. That might be enough to win the division. I guess. I guess we'll see. Do you like that the Colts are opening the season with the Texans at home, or do you wish that they'd gotten like a non-divisional game to start?
I mean, obviously you'd want to start week one with like the biggest cupcake ever just to start out, just to start the season on a great track. Like I would have loved to have got like Carolina or someone like that. But I think starting with Houston at home is perfect for this team because it just starts where everything left off last year. You went in there with your backup quarterback late in the season, a couple injuries on your team, didn't have guys like Jelani Woods and all that in that game. They went in there against Houston and they battled it out and came one pass short of, taking the divisional winners knocking them out of the playoffs and taking that spot. With Gardner Minshew as their starting quarterback. So again, hopefully everyone's healthy going into Week 1 this year. I can't stress enough how important that is for this team and how important it's been, for the last couple of years of this team. But if everyone's healthy, you're coming into this Week 1 game at home where it all ended last year. You have your quarterback back, your quarterback who scored 14 points in 3 possessions against this team last year. You get him back out there, and you get your offense ready to go. Hopefully, your defense can continue what they were doing in that final game matchup last year, and you just pick up where you left off, and hopefully it can be a better result this year. I think it's a great place to start for the Colts, though. Like Week 1, you get the team that everyone's saying is this big bad threat in your division. You get a chance to punch them in the mouth at home in Week 1 and really just set the tone for your season. I think that's a massive, massive game for the Colts, arguably the biggest game of the year, just out the gate. But I wouldn't want it any other way. Like I want them to have that big game to kick off the season against one of the best young quarterbacks, one of the best young coaches, and one of the best young teams in football. I want to get that matchup, just ready to go from Week 1 and just see what this Colts team is all about.
Yeah, I didn't think about it that way at all. I was like, why couldn't we have played like the Vikings in Week 1? That was
Yeah.
my response. But no, that's a great way of looking at it. Once again, joined by Zach Hicks of Locked On Colts. You mentioned the Colts hopefully walk into the season without any major injuries. So a lot of those injuries are probably going to take place during OTAs. And I've been like at home trying to figure out what questions do I have going into OTAs? What are the things that are going to be answered from this team? But I got to be honest. I think the thing that I'm most intrigued by are these new kickoff rules. How big of a focus do you think that's going to be for the Colts and really for the rest of the league heading into OTAs?
Oh, it's going to be a massive focus. I think we're going to see a big change in how bottom of the rosters are kind of handled by a lot of teams. What we typically see with a lot of teams these last couple of years is keeping a lot of defensive backs and bottom of the roster wide receivers to, focus more on that gunner role or focus more on that speed, getting up the field as like a gunner and all those things on punt coverage. But now with punt coverage is still important. Like, don't get me wrong, but
Yeah.
with another big aspect now being these kickoff rules where a lot of these returns are going to be like run plays. You're going to have to focus more on getting very fast defensive ends maybe on your roster, more linebackers on your roster maybe to combat that. And then inversely on the other side, maybe more tight ends that can block on those kickoff returns, or maybe more running backs that can return the ball back there. Like I know the Colts probably want Anthony Gould back there. Maybe you could still put Dallas Flowers or someone back there, but I'm assuming they're going to want Anthony Gould, but you're going to need someone who can block from. You're going to need a backup to him, and maybe that's like an Evan Hull type or someone like that. So I think this just opens the door to so many different ways to build the roster now. Like, what good is a 190-pound corner who runs a 4.3 when these guys are starting 10 yards apart from each other and just lining up and hitting each other on these like designed run play kickoff returns? Like, you're not going to keep that 6'7" corner who just runs really fast as a gunner over a linebacker who can actually make things happen on those. So yeah, I'm with you. I think that's going to be the most fascinating aspect. We're going to see a lot of teams probably lean more linebacker heavy at the bottom of the roster, or maybe on the practice squad for like game day call ups, just to kind of combat those new rules on kickoff returns.
Yeah, that's all really really interesting. I because that was kind of my thought process of are we going to see more linebackers, kind of just bigger kickoff and kick return units with the use of the tight ends and the linebackers. That's something I'm really intrigued by. Which player are you most interested in seeing how they perform during OTAs for the Colts? For me, it's Gould. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
super intrigued by him. He's kind of this gadgety, can do a lot of different things, kind of wide receiver. So that's the guy for me. Who's the guy for you where you're like, I want to see how this guy looks?
Yeah, I think obviously all the rookies, I'm really excited to see them just because they're new. It's always fun seeing something new, and seeing these guys like Adonai Mitchell, who we just haven't seen a receiver like that here in Indy in a long time, a guy who can move like that. I'm really excited to see what he looks like against this Colts secondary. But I'll go with the guy who was a rookie last year who tore his ACL early. And he's at a position that's really important for the Colts that they really don't have many answers for. And I'm going to say Daniel Scott. He was a day 3 pick last year for the Colts. Tore his ACL early in camp, so we really didn't get to see much of him. But really, really great athlete, versatile player who can do a lot of things on defense. And when you're looking at this Colts safety depth chart, like Nick Cross, we've kind of seen a little bit of him, and it hasn't been great. Like it's been fine. It hasn't been great. Rodney Thomas has been very up and down. Like there is snaps to be had at safety right now. And if these guys don't take over, if one of those two guys or Daniel Scott doesn't really like prove their worth in camp here, it's going to be a free agent addition. And that's perfectly fine. But I would love for one of these guys just to take that spot and run with it. And I think Daniel Scott has a great opportunity coming back this year after that injury to get in there and get some snaps and really show what he can do. So I know Daniel Scott was the guy the Colts were high on last year. They were really bummed when he got hurt and they lost what he could have done in his rookie season. So I'm excited to see him out there. I mean, again, this is a guy who moves at a very different speed. And outside of like Nick Cross, I don't know if anyone else in the safety room can move like Daniel Scott.
Okay. Daniel Scott. That is not the answer I thought I was going to get. I love it though. Joined by Zach Hicks of Locked On Colts. As you can tell, his knowledge of this Colts roster is pretty great. So you may have just answered my last question for you here. I was going to say, who's the player no one is paying attention to heading into OTAs that we're going to be discussing during or after OTAs are finished?
Ooh, okay. I'll say someone else because Daniel Scott obviously would have fit that as well.
Yeah.
I think the prime candidates that you're looking at are the guys who flashed last year but just needed something tweaked in the offseason. So once that thing got tweaked, they really could be good players. So I'm thinking either like a Blake Freeland last year where, you could see some good moments and some good growth from him late in the season as that reserve tackle, but by the end, he just wasn't ready. That he wasn't ready for it. He needed to add strength. And like Bernhard Raimann in Raimann's first year, Raimann needed to add more muscle, add more strength. And when he came back in with more muscle and strength, he was a fantastic left tackle for the Colts. So I think if Freeland comes into camp looking bigger and stronger, we could be looking at him being like, oh man, we have another tackle that can play for the Colts this year. I think Adetomi Adebawore as well on defensive tackle. We're talking about all these other guys, these top end guys on the roster, defensive ends they added, but Adetomi had some good flashes last year as a reserve pass rusher. And if he just adds a little bit more, hands to his game and a little more development, like this is a 280-pound guy who ran a 4.4 at the combine. Like he's a fantastic athlete. So if he just comes into camp looking a little bit different with his size and a little bit stronger, like this is a guy who could just be killing the second and third team offensive lines. So I think those are the two guys that really stand out to me as like, if they did the work this offseason and really changed a little bit of how their bodies are and to get ready for the NFL game, those two guys could really look fantastic in training camp.
Okay. I love having you on, man. Your knowledge is great. It's very much appreciated. I've been in full like Pacers mode, and so I haven't done my homework on the Colts roster yet. So, dude, thank you for your time. It's always very much appreciated. I'm sure I'll be having you on hopefully more and more as we get closer and closer to the season. Zach, thank you so much, man.
Of course, man.